Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of February 27th, 2025. And we will now call this meeting to order. As is our practice, we start with our land acknowledgement. Grimsby is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wurrung, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Regional Municipality of Niagara and the Town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. At this time in every agenda, we always ask for any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest, and are there any this evening?
Hi, Chair. Yes, I have a conflict of interest on item 8.1, Finance 25-13, Summary of 2024 Tax Write-Offs.
Thank you. That will be so noted. And typically, when we do declare disclosures of interest, not only do we ask our members not to vote at that point, but we also ask them to refrain from providing any comments or things like that when we are on that particular topic. So thank you for that. Item 4 is the approval of the agenda. Could I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda? Thank you to my two councillors there. Are there any questions from the committee on the agenda or anything like that? Then the motion is that it is resolved that the agenda for February 27th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting be approved. By a show of hands, all those in favor, please. Anthony, we'll ask you to just verbally say what your vote is as we get to each point. So on the approval of the agenda, would that be a yes or a no?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. You are welcome to jump in at that point in time for sure. Also on our agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes of January 23rd, 2025. Could I have a mover and seconder to receive the previous meeting minutes, please? That would be Member Thompson and Councillor Korstanji. Any questions on the minutes or any amendments to them noted? I hear none. So resolved that the minutes of the January 23rd, 2025 Finance Committee meeting be approved. By a show of hands, please, all those in favor? Anthony?
Yay, sorry. I am sorry. Yes.
We have a little bit of a delay, and that's okay. Thank you. So that motion is carried. As you can see from our agenda, item 6 are delegations and reports, of which we have none tonight. And item 7 are the consent reports, and there are no consent reports this evening either. So we will move on to item 8. The discussion reports. We'll start with item 8.1, which is Finance Report 25-13. In order to get it on the floor, could I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Howe and Councillor Korstanji seconded that. So I will turn it over to you, Mr. Delmonico, to explain the report.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So this is an information report. There's a legislated requirement that we report on these to council annually. And the report identifies the reductions that have been applied to property taxes owing related to specific circumstances, such as when demolition has occurred or a fire has occurred or the property has just experienced a change in tax classification. So the way it works is that property owners initiate the process by submitting an application to us with details as to why a change in their assessment and related taxes is warranted. And the application form can be found on our website, and a copy has been attached to the report for reference. So the applications are first reviewed by our staff to verify eligibility and then submitted to MPAC to review and determine the revised assessment figures if applicable. In 2024, we received 15 applications that met the eligible criteria and were approved. And Table 2, or the table on page 2, rather, summarizes the reasons and the tax impacts and the adjustments. So the amounts written off in 2024 amounted to a total of $30,300. That's inclusive of regional and education taxes. The impact on the town taxes was $6,700 for general taxes and an additional $1,100 for the wastewater portion of the taxes. And I just noticed, if the clerk could please note that the title should be 2024 tax write-offs, not 2025 tax write-offs. That could be noted, please. Thank you. If there's any questions?
Councillor Howe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Director, when impact, I guess every time I see that term, it kind of throws me, but we know that the assessment, they haven't done, property assessments since 2016, but what kind of turnaround do they give us, like when we submit this report or a request to them, what kind of, we're not waiting years for, do they get it back in a fairly, why can't they do that with other things? Interesting. Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, I know there is a deadline to submit applications for property owners. I believe it's the end of February of the following year. In terms of the turnaround time, we do have Lisa Martin on the line, our Manager of Revenues and Collections. She could comment on what the typical turnaround time is. But my understanding is it's fairly quick.
Good evening. Through the chair, yes, the turnaround response for these applications is fairly good. We submit them through an online portal once the application's been completed, and then they follow up with a response. Impact has a service level agreement. I believe it's 90 days, but they generally get back to us much quicker than that on these, and we have a good relationship with our representative there too, so it's generally fairly quick. And within the delegated authority, it allows us to provide relief to property owners much more quickly than if we have to gather applications and come to council twice a year. So this process is working fairly well. I think maybe what Councillor Howe is referring to is some of the assessment gaps that we have, that we're waiting on Impact to reply, and we are working with them on those things too, to see what we can get moving a little more quickly.
Go ahead. Do you have a follow-up question?
I do. I didn't know that Lisa was here. When we demolish a building and someone comes in and demolishes a commercial building, knocks it down, it's my understanding that, then they're going to ask for relief on that. But is there a time frame at which that relief runs out? We see a couple of properties kicking around where, a building has been taken down and, they've got a break. It's a property that's sitting there that probably we could use, for development purposes. But it just, if they're getting a break and they just sit on this land, it doesn't do anybody any favors.
Yeah, so the request for relief, like I mentioned, it goes up until the end of February of the following year. So if they were to say not apply until March or April or May, then they could only apply for the current year's relief of taxes. In terms of how long it stays vacant, that's another question, and not really governed by the legislation that allows for the tax exemptions.
And maybe in follow-up to Councillor Howe's question, once they do request the change and it is processed, I think you were referring to the fact that sometimes in some situations, the land, if we're talking about something that's been turned into vacant land because of a demolition or a fire, sometimes that vacant land just sits there as vacant land for a very long time and no one actually proceeds to rebuild on it or anything like that. Is that what you were referring to in your question?
But it's still developable land. Now, I don't think that that is a category for property tax standards. Is it something that we could do? You leave that property empty and forlorn for, let's say, 5 years. Let's say 5 years, cut it. I mean, I understand it takes a while to pull things around. But then after that, then let's get it up to a developable land type of a rate. Is it? I'm going to guess that these guys have got it tied up pretty tight, and that's not going to happen, but have we ever heard of that, or?
Yeah, I mean, if it's private land, it's up to the owner, right? I mean, that kind of goes back to the vacant land taxes that some municipalities have imposed, and, you know, when we look at the cost of administering that type of program, it probably costs more than it would be worth to run.
Member Thompson, did you have a question?
Yes, through you, Chair. Mine is along the similar line, and I'm going to spin it the other way. What is our staff doing for economic development to planning department, working with especially the commercial lands when fire has devastated some lands, as we have seen downtown Grimsby, and it's been several years? Are we working on, you may not be able to answer it, but I'm hoping somebody is working with them to, let's move this along, because that is money that should be coming in by now. I'm just curious if you do know.
Yeah, I do not, but yeah, you know, certainly we would like to see it redeveloped as soon as possible too, get taxes rolling back in, and I'm sure economic development would be happy to work with them however they can if they're willing to reach out.
If there are no other questions on this, then I'm going to call for the vote. And before I do that, I'll just read the actual resolution again. So resolved that Report Finance 25-13, the summary of 2024 tax write-offs dated February 27th, 2025, be received for information. All those in favor with a show of hands, please. And we won't ask Anthony to vote on that, so that is passed. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is 8.2. Finance Report 25-14, and it's our biannual procurement report. Mr. Delmarco?
Yes, thank you. So this report's brought to committee twice per year, and it outlines the types of procurements that were made and the related values. The report covers the July to December 2024 period. And if you look on the table on page 2, you'll see a breakdown of the types of procurements that were made during this time. And that amounted to 9 procurements via the informal quote process, 9 via open competition, 6 cooperative procurements, 4 non-competitive, and 1 emergency procurement that was approved in that time. And you'll also see the total value of the procurements was $20 million, but about $15 million of that was related to the PKC, the Peach King Center project. So you might recall that the construction tenders for the Peach King Center were broken out into 4 packages with 4 separate procurements. So for the purposes of this report, they end up being shown as contract amendments. On a related note, the procurement bylaw, we brought that to the committee last month for review, and before we bring that back for approval, we are still waiting to obtain just a few things, a general legal review, legal opinion on the options available to us for prioritizing Canadian goods, as well as reviewing our thresholds for potential modification. Thank you.
And before I entertain any questions, I forgot to ask someone to make the motion and second it to actually have it on the table. If I could just cover off that. Thank you, Councillor Kristanji and Member Thompson. Now, are there any questions about this? Member Thompson, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Director. Contract amendments, on page 9 in that we see that, of course, we knew about it, the increases that have been occurring since the contracts weren't fulfilled during the pandemic. We're assured moving forward, I believe in 2025 budgets and that there's going to be enough money that we won't be seeing people coming back and saying we have to ask for another maybe $3 to $4 million this year to get other jobs done that may have been delayed. I'm just curious on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, these contract amendments don't necessarily tie in with, they don't necessarily mean there's been a budget amendment. In some cases there may have been, but it's not necessarily dollar for dollar that way. And yeah, we hope the budget that was approved was sufficient to meet our needs, but until we actually go out and tender for them, sometimes there is always a bit of a risk.
I think I'll just add to that, because I did ask that question during the budget process, asked some of our senior staff, if they were feeling more comfortable these days, that we certainly had some surprises early on in 24, I guess it was, even into 23, where, things were going out to tender and coming back for much, much more than what we were expecting. And as I recall, the response was they're feeling that they have a much better handle around where the quotes are, what the estimates are now, and that what was provided in our budget is, they're certainly feeling more comfortable with the numbers that went into the budget. Go ahead, Member Thompson.
Yeah, and just to finish up, I was wondering, just to make a recommendation, if the procurement manager, because we've been discussing this for several months now, possibly look into a way that the town or municipality, and I think the procurement manager would be the right one to look into it, doesn't have to disclose how much money basically we have, because you can see it in the budget moving forward in the 2026 budgets. As we've been discussing around the table here, if the public hasn't been hearing, is it's in our budget. The contractors know how much contingency to everything that is out there, and sometimes that's not good for municipalities to do, because by the end of the contract, the contingency at everything's usually gone. And I was just wondering if it's something we can really seriously look into. You've been beating around for a while, and maybe this is the time we can make a recommendation to have someone look at it.
We certainly could ask the staff to look at the viability of that suggestion. And I'm going to say, related to that, even, maybe talk to some other municipalities and see if there is anybody else that is kind of worried about the same issue and how they have grappled with such detailed disclosure, and whether, making those numbers more general might, it's hard to measure though, right? When you take those steps, it is hard to measure. Like, does that mean that the quotes are better than they would be otherwise, right? It's one of those metrics that it does sound like a good idea, and you would think from a practical perspective it should work, but it's hard to measure if, when you make that change, if it really is getting you better and lower quotes than otherwise. So it's hard from that perspective, but certainly if we think that we'd at least like our staff to look into, now's the time. Might I ask your opinion on this, Mr. Delmonico?
Yeah, certainly, yeah, we could do some digging into that, see if there's any other municipalities we could use as kind of a guide for that. And yeah, I know with the last few years with the inflationary increases, I think because of the way inflation was running high, it was also leading to some budgets not being able to be sufficient. But yeah, we can certainly look into some options.
Member Scandinavo has his hand up. You have the floor.
Thank you. Just a quick question in regards, well, I have two quick questions. One in regards to cooperative procurement. So when I look at this list here, item 2, or even the fire item, like the last one on page 7 of 12 or 17 of 32. Like, it's showing cost sharing with the town of Lincoln or town of West Lincoln, and it shows, the pre-tax procurement and the Grimsby obligation, right? So understanding that, what we're basically saying is we've done a procurement with another entity, and, here's our portion thereof, right? There's a number of other items on the list. They all seem to be with the LAS Canoe Procurement Group. And it's like the pre-tax procurement value and the Grimsby obligation is exactly the same. So I'm just curious, who are we cooperating with? And if we're cooperating with somebody, how come they don't have to pay any of the bill, or perhaps, maybe I'm missing something here.
Yeah, through the chair. The ones you see there with LAS Canoe Procurement Group, that's a buying group that municipalities can leverage. And so we aren't buying with another municipality. We're the only one buying, which is why you see the amount of pre-tax and our amount, the one and the same. So we're not sharing that like we are with Lincoln, for example, for the fire service delivery review. We bought the skid steer ourselves. We utilized the LAS Canoe Procurement Group, the contract that they had with that vendor.
Right. So I guess perhaps just maybe it's semantics for me. We're not cooperating with a group, but rather we're leveraging a pre-existing contract through a procurement group that's shared by multiple municipalities, so to speak. Right.
Through the chair, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the clarity. I think it's just semantics. Maybe I don't know. I don't want to drive how these reports are written, but perhaps maybe we can split that up in the future. Again, open to everybody's thoughts. I don't want to be the only one who wants to see a change to force a change through, but just a thought, maybe just a little easier maybe to read on that front. And then the other question I had, and just maybe, I'm definitely not a procurement expert, and I'm sure there's probably some legislation or some guidelines on it, and I'm more or less just curious about it. At what point in time, do we move away from a contract amendment, right? So I guess in my opinion, we enter into an agreement with somebody. Obviously, at some point in time, the value of what we're procuring changes. So in order to be, in compliance with our agreement, we go and amend the contract. At what point in time do we say, wait a minute, the value of this procurement is substantially more than what our initial contract is for? Should we go back with the procurement again to make, to make sure that we're getting the best value for what we're doing? And again, I'm assuming there's some sort of guidelines or regulation on that, but I'm just curious to maybe when we make a determination to say, I'm just going to pick on the first one here, right? This corporate security camera expansion. It's like the original contract's $35,000, right? And then the new procurement values, $79,000. It's like, well, hold on a second here. What's, we've more than doubled this. Should we go back out to market? But again, I can understand there's probably synergies with using the existing vendor, but just curious.
Yeah, through the chair, that's a good question. Yeah, certainly we do look at the different factors of whether it's worth taking extra time and just putting it out again for a separate bid, for example. And in this particular case, the winning vendor, the quote was so much substantially lower than the other vendors that it made sense to move forward with the additional change in scope with the same vendor. I believe it was almost half as much in this case. So we certainly do look at it. It ends up being case by case in terms of what makes most sense.
Understood. So a combination of the finance team and whomever, whatever department's procuring this, sit down and make a decision to figure out what's best for the town.
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I have a question just in follow-up to those thoughts. I think what we're doing is just exercising common sense. But would it be worth, I'll say, codifying it, like putting it into the procurement policy and something along those lines that says, when we get in this, I'll just use very general terms, in this particular situation, we will we will relook at it. If it is under budget, we will not. If it is, do you know what I mean? I'm being very general in how that would be worded, because I'm not trying to put words in the policy, but, would it be, it seems like such common sense, but would it be worth it still to build it into our policy?
So we do have it in our policy in terms of the thresholds of amendments that need to go to council, to the treasurer, that can be approved by the department director, for example. So we do have that built in. I think it would be difficult to try to identify every single scenario that would come up, and it could lead to certainly delays if we were to have to bring everything to finance committee or council, for example. But there are certainly thresholds where amendments, larger amendments do, I believe it's 100,000, have to be presented to council.
Member Scandinavo, is your hand still up? Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, no follow-up question. Thank you for that. Your responses are very helpful, Tony. I guess just if I keep going with that, so if we're using like common sense to determine that, and I guess you're also saying that, we find ourselves in a situation where, yes, the department director might need to approve the expense, or council might need to approve the expense. I guess I'm understanding that as approving budget or approving use of funds. I'm more or less talking about the procurement piece, saying that, if we enter into an agreement for, a dollar value, and then upon, moving forward, the value of the contract more than doubles, at what point in time do we pause and say, maybe the original procurement wasn't sort of correct? Like I've seen this just in my experience where, when using procurement processes, a lot of the times it's, not always, but a lot of the times it's sort of first past the post on the price, right? So there's like an incentive for vendors to obviously put in their, the quote unquote cheapest price. And then what ends up happening is, as you're moving through the project, there's add this or add that. We end up at a price point sort of higher than perhaps some of the other bidders, but some of the other bidders would have been, but we actually don't know that because we didn't compare apples to apples. All we compared them on was the initial price. So again, just picking on this example about the security cameras, they came in at $34,000 for the original agreement, but how do we know that other vendors would have been more than double on the $45,000 cumulative increase? Maybe other vendors would have been $35,000. Again, I'm just using this as an example. I don't know the details of this procurement. I'm just more or less curious, and not to say that everybody's judgment isn't, to be relied upon, because of course these things are operational and we should rely on our experts' judgment. But I think it might be helpful to maybe set some thresholds as to when contract amendments should at least go back to the procurement department for a discussion to say, should we re-procure this? Like, should we re-go through the tendering process because, we've tripled or it's exceeded this dollar value or whatever the case may be. But anyways, nevertheless, thanks for listening to the question.
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, I think, the answer to that is that we do, right? We do have these discussions. We do see what does make the most sense in terms of, dollar-wise, time-wise, how critical is this that this gets done right away? Was it fairly scoped to begin with? Those are all things that are considered. And, I think it is, although you see this example there as the first one, it is kind of, rare that you would see a doubling of an amendment like that. They're usually smaller, but I guess the short answer is that yes, that does happen, and we certainly want to make sure that we're scoping projects out as clearly as possible to begin with. Sometimes it's just hard to get it 100% the first time.
For sure. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Are there any other questions or comments about this? And then I will take the member up on the new resolution, but we'll finish this topic first. I'm not seeing any hands up. So at this point in time, if there are no further questions, then I need to consult with my clerk here. Do I still need a first and seconder, or do we have one for this now to be on the floor?
We would need one for a new, if we have a new resolution.
No, but for this existing one? Or we had
We'd
that?
have to vote on the new one.
Yes, yes. No, we need to vote on this one first, and then we'll move on to the new one? Or would you like us to,
No, it would be the new one first.
First, and then this one?
Receive the report, yeah.
okay, fair enough. So the suggestion that came from our member was to ask staff to go back and to look at budget disclosures. I'll say to look at detailed budget disclosures, to look at that issue and see if there might be some advantages in terms of having a more global disclosure in the budget and not the details. Am I wording it correctly? Could I ask Member Thompson just to add your thoughts to it?
Thank you, Chair. No, I just don't want to take a ton of staff time. They got enough to go on their plate. I'm just trying to figure, after listening to this for months, and you were mentioning it earlier, it does make sense, because we're starting to see it more and more that I believe the disclosure of our budgets is possibly not helping us. And I'm just curious if other municipalities out there is a legal way of not disclosing, as you're saying, and keeping the details tighter and make it more global. I don't want to take too much time of everybody on this. I actually don't know how to word it, or something the director can look into for us, and there doesn't really need to be a resolution, does there? I'm not sure here.
I mean, direction would probably be better in a resolution so that our staff know exactly what we're asking them to look into. Let's just take a 2-minute break, and I'm going to consult with the clerk, see if we can come up with a description for the resolution, and then we'll come back to that. Back live. We have taken some time to try and word this, as it was not on our agenda. I'm just going to ask the clerk can you put it up on the screen, or no, you don't have an assistant. He's going to read it to us.
So resolve that staff report back to the Finance Committee regarding the implications of detailed reporting in capital budget disclosures and options for disclosure.
Okay, so we're assuming, Member Thompson, you're going to make that resolution. Councillor Korsanji has seconded it. Is there a question still by Councillor Howe?
Wondering if maybe a friendly amendment, if we could bring the term contingency funds being in those numbers. I prefer that we never show the contingency fund, how much is there. But I don't know if that's possible. It goes in lockstep with what we're trying to accomplish by putting this, for our planning. But again, that's just more information that we're spitting out there. And it's really, contingency is real easy money. I'm here to tell you right now, that's easy money.
I'll let the, Mr. Delmonico reply to that first.
Yeah, thanks through the chair. Yeah, so typically with our budget documents, we'll show the capital project detail sheet with the overall gross costs, the gross expenditures, and then revenue sources, but we wouldn't typically disclose contingencies at that level either. So, yeah, we can look at the level of disclosure, but we're already not at that detailed level.
Yes, so just to echo his thoughts, so at the budget level, when the budget comes to the committee of the whole and to council, it's not at the level of disclosing contingencies and things like that. It's only once I think it's been awarded that we start to get reports or more detail that then begins to show the contingencies. So, yes. I think based upon the discussion today, it's been good, and I think certainly Mr. Delmonico is aware of our concerns along those lines, so I think we're probably safe to leave it with him that in his travels and in his research on this particular issue, he'll keep that in mind as he's working on it for us. Will that do? I think when he comes back with the report, if he's able to answer your concern, great. If he's not, please raise it again. Okay, so I'm going to ask our clerk to read it one more time.
Resolve that staff report back to the Finance Committee regarding the implications of detailed reporting in capital budget disclosures and options for disclosure.
Okay, so we have had someone make the motion and second it. I will now call for the vote. All those in favor by raising your hand, please. And Member Scandinavo?
Yep.
Thank you. That resolution is passed. The next item on our agenda is, sorry.
Second vote.
Oh, yes, sorry. We got that in amongst the actual resolution. So the second item on our agenda of 8.2, the resolution for that is resolve that report Finance 25-14, the biannual procurement report dated February 27th, 2025, be received for information. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And Member Scandinavo.
Yep.
Thank you. That is carried. Now we can move on to item 8.3, which is Finance Report 25-15 on the Peach King Center. And in order to get it on the floor, if I could have a mover and seconder, please, Councillor Korstanji and Councillor Howe. So I will turn it over to Mr. Delmonico.
Thank you. So the Peach King Center project is still trending under budget. We've reached a 25% utilization of our contingency versus 30% construction progress completion. And so, we are conservatively estimating that we will need to use most of that up by the time the project ends. But I think we're in a good spot right now, given where we're at with the construction progress. So we'll continue to provide monthly updates as the project progresses.
Any questions or comments on it? Would you say it's fair, would it be fair to say that the contingencies or the unexpected issues typically arrive at the beginning of the project more so than once we're into it? It's like we get into it and we discover something in the ground we weren't expecting, or some pipe here, there, whatever. I'm not a construction person, so I'm describing this in a very general way. This is the accountant talking, not the construction person, but would it be fair to say that contingencies arrive more at the beginning? No? I see heads on my side there going, no. Could I ask any of you to comment on that?
With contingency or the change orders, that they'll come later on when the actual drawing turns up that it's bad, that it's not going to fit, and that becomes the change orders. And they know that if they work it on the change orders, and if they've got to get to here, but they're right here, well, now someone's under a little bit of pressure, right? You got to, you cave to it. So, no, it's, they know how to work it to get the extras.
So we're not out of the woods yet, is what we're really knowing. Okay. Are there any particular questions about this report yet? I'm not seeing any hands up, so we'll move on to the resolution then, if there are no further questions. Resolve that report, Finance 25-15, the Peach King Center expansion, February 2025 update, which is dated February 27th, 2025, be received for information. And all those in favor by show of hands? Member Scandinavo?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion is carried. The last item amongst our discussion reports is item 8.4, Finance 25-16, which is our 2025 Finance Committee Work Plan. If I could have a mover and seconder to get that on the floor. Councillor Howe, and I'll take Member Thompson this time. Thank you. Sorry, we can't see Anthony's head, so he's not going to get to make a resolution to make it or second it, but that's okay. There's another time. So the work plan has been circulated again. Any comments, suggestions, questions about it? Councillor Howe.
Through you, Chair. Tony, with us tackling the DC, the community benefit, and the user fee, that's usually has been outside, hasn't it? I'm just trying to remember that coming out of finance. Quite often, I thought that we would have consultants for doing the DC charges. If it's new or we're good to go, I think it's wonderful. And I certainly applaud you taking it on.
Yeah, through the chair, no, that is still the plan. Even with the use of consultants, all these types of projects still will require staff input from throughout the whole organization, all departments reviewing their growth plans and strategies over the next 10 years and beyond, so.
So some of these items, even though we have them under our terms of reference as the Finance Committee, they certainly are going to involve a lot of the other departments too. So it truly is a team effort here. Any questions from any of the other members? Seeing none, then the resolution on the floor is resolved that Finance Report 25-16, the 2025 Finance Committee Work Plan, which is dated February 27th, 2025, be received, and that the committee recommends to Council to approve the 2025 Work Plan, which is attached as Appendix A to the resolution. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And that is carried. The next item on our agenda is number 9, which is correspondence, and there is none this evening. Item 10 on our agenda is other business. Does anyone have any other business they'd like to raise? And I see a hand up. Member Thompson.
Yes, through you, Chair, just a quick thank you to Council. Several taxpayers in Grimsby have come to me, and as just a public member, I want to thank you for being on top of the region on this transit. That's a complete mess and a nightmare, and it's just going to keep going up and up and up, and we were well warned about it, and unfortunately we're in it. We got that triple majority, and maybe things can change, but I see Lincoln's on it, but thank you to Council for staying on top of this.
Any other items of new business that any members wish to raise this evening? I'm not seeing any. So the next meeting of the Finance Committee is scheduled for Thursday, March 27th at 6 PM. And I'm just going to stop there. Many of our other standing committees that meet in the evenings typically start at 6:30. And a long time ago, we did set 6 o'clock just to accommodate all the various commitments that people have behind the scenes. Is 6 o'clock still good for everyone? Still works? Okay. Then we will continue with that. So that's confirmed. The next meeting is Thursday, March 27th at 6 PM. And with no other items, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Hey, Direct.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.